We all have those times in our life, don't we? Those times when everything just seems to be so wrong. And people have described those times as like trying to wade through treacle. No matter how hard you try to do something, everything seems to be holding you back, stopping you, preventing you. We don't seem to be able to move from that place of sadness that we've found ourselves. Actually, we seem to be getting sucked deeper and deeper into a pit of despondency. Sometimes a period in our life like that can be brought on by a tragic event. Something really awful happening, just making us desperately unhappy. Sometimes as a result of being absolutely overwhelmed by responsibility and problems, and the demands that everything seems to be placing on us, our family, people around us, our friends, work perhaps, maybe even the church. Sometimes those feelings can be brought on by looking at our life and just seeing a never-ending road of unchanging nothingness. Nothing to motivate us or excite us. In the church especially, perhaps it can be triggered by a feeling that we're losing our fight against a particular sin. There's that one sin that we just can't get on top of. It beats us over and over again, and we feel we're letting everybody down, most of all letting God down. At other times, that feeling, we don't know why it's there. There doesn't seem to be any logical reason why we should feel so depressed. But as Christians, those moments, that sadness, that depression, can be exacerbated by the feeling that God has abandoned us. Here I am at the lowest point that I've been in years. Where is God? Why is God not helping me through this? And it's that feeling of God abandoning us in our darkest moments when we need Him most that is explored by the writer of Psalm 77. Doesn't he describe it well? Verse 1. I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. Verse 2. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night I stretched out untiring hands, and my soul refused to be comforted. Verse 3. I remembered you, and I groaned. I mused in my spirit and grew faint. I reckon those words probably ring true to most of us here this morning. We've been through times in our lives crying out to God, stretching out hands, hands outstretched up to God. That's the biblical way of praying. We see that in churches now. We think, oh, that's some modern fancy schmancy way. Actually, it's the biblical way. This idea was never in the Bible. The Bible stretching out hands in prayer. And our psalmist, he's prayed and he's prayed and he's prayed and he's cried out to God. And God does not seem to be answering him. We felt like that. We've prayed and we've called out to God. It's as if our very souls refuse to be comforted. We can't break out of that unhappiness. And even sleep isn't an escape, is it, in those moments? Verse 4, you kept my eyes from closing. I was too troubled to speak. Have you ever been so troubled, so scared, so worried, so low, that you couldn't even tell the people closest to you? You couldn't share this with anybody. And even at night, when we think that the darkness and going to bed and closing our eyes will get us awake, no, it doesn't. It's still there and we can't sleep, and the troubled thoughts go over and over in our head. The first thing I really want to get across to us all this morning is that when we feel like that, it is okay to express our feelings to God. It is okay to turn to God and say to him, why have you abandoned me? Why am I feeling like this? Where are you, God? And it is okay to talk to other people in the church and tell them that this is how you're feeling. I know that the church at times, and we probably still do at times, we make people feel as though they shouldn't feel like this. As if somehow they're wrong to feel like this and to have these thoughts. And you can't express them, and you can't talk about them to other people, and you certainly can't go railing at God and shouting at him. How dare you? Maybe the church has even suggested that you just need to snap out of it. Just snap out of it. Just remember some good things and everything will be okay, and stop dwelling on the misery. If that were true, if it were true that we should just snap out of it and that we should never express thoughts like this to God or to others, then why has God allowed a psalm like this to be included in his word? And many other psalms as well. If we look through the Psalms and we look through Ecclesiastes and Song of Songs and Lamentations, and we see these kind of thoughts being expressed and the heart of the writer being poured out on the pages, why would God have allowed that to be included in his word if we were never to ask those questions of him and never to express those thoughts? I think that the writers of psalms like this are setting us an example. They are pouring out their hearts to God about their deepest thoughts, the things that really trouble them, the pain that they're feeling, the rejection that they feel from God. And they're saying to us, through the thousands of years, it is okay for you to go and ask God why he's rejected you. And I think he's showing us that it is okay for us to talk to others in the church about these things as well. Perhaps it says to us as a church, you need to be willing to hear people when they feel like this. And listen to them and not judge them. And don't try to give an easy answer. Because it's not easy escaping when we feel like this. But I think that this psalm and other psalms like this, yes, they show us that it is okay to come and ask these questions of God. But I think they also tell us that when we come and ask these questions of God, we need to be ready to listen to the answer. It is okay to ask questions of God and ask him to answer us. I think that's very different from just telling God that he's wrong, which is a different emotion altogether. If you look through all the Psalms where this kind of desperation is being expressed, there is nearly always one verse which is a turning point. When things change. And in Psalm 77, the turning point is verse 10. Then I thought, remember, he's been pouring out these emotions. He feels rejected and abandoned and hurt. Then I thought, to this I will appeal. The years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. I will meditate on all your works and consider all your mighty deeds. The psalmist was asking serious questions about the very nature and character of God. Was God a God who would abandon one of his children? Was God a God who would turn his back on him in the middle of his deepest depression and hurt and pain? He says, how am I going to answer that question? How am I going to know what the nature of God really is? I'm going to think about the things that God has done in the past. I'm going to remind myself of everything that I know of the nature of God from what he's done in years gone by. And a particular thing that the psalmist here thinks back on was God rescuing his people from Egypt. Verses 16 to 20, he's talking about that rescue from Egypt of God's people. He says to himself, God, this God who I'm wrestling with these thoughts about at the moment, he stepped down into our creation to rescue a whole people from captivity. And he led them to safety, and he led them to a new life as his people. That is what our God did. Will a God who did that abandon me now? He has shown his power. He has shown his might. He's shown that he's a God who wants to save people. He's shown he's a God who loves his own people. What makes me think that he will abandon me right now when I'm in the midst of this crisis? Everything that I know about God from the past tells me something about his nature. And so when I am troubled by thoughts about God's nature, I remember what he's done in the past to remind myself who he is. We kind of do that a bit with people who we know, don't we? If we think somebody might have let us down, or if we think somebody might have stolen from us or something, we kind of think back and say, well, what kind of a person is this? Actually, do you know, I know this person, and I don't think he would have let me down. I don't think he would have stolen from me. I don't think he would have done. No, there must be some explanation, because that just isn't him. Of course, humans do sometimes act out of character. Sometimes we do get those horrible surprises with humans, but not with God. God does not act out of character. So when we're troubled about what he's doing and why, we remind ourselves of who God is. If you remember back to, I think it was last week, and we talked about the names of God and how the names used of God tell us something about how that writer is feeling towards God at that moment. How God slowly revealed himself through his name in different times. In verse 1 of this psalm, it's simply the word God that is used. And that is the same word for God that could be used in any religion about any God. It is some remote deity who has power over this world. It's an impersonal name. Verse 2, we read, he's called Lord, but in lowercase. So that's just the writer saying, I know that he is Lord. I know that he has authority. but he's still remote. In verse 11, I will remember the deeds of the Lord, now written in capitals. That's a euphemism for the personal name of God, the name revealed to Moses on the mountain. When the writer starts remembering the nature and the character of God, he remembers a personal God. A God who has revealed himself by name. A God who knows him and a God that he knows. This is not a God who will remain remote and leave us in a pit of despair when we need him most. This is a personal, loving God who he knows by name. It is okay to ask those difficult questions about God. But as we do so, we should also look for their answers. And we find them, like the psalmist did, by reflecting on what God has done. And we are able to do something that the psalmist isn't, because we can look in a very personal way, say, what has God done for me? In a little while, as we share the bread and the wine, we're going to reflect on what God has done for us, for you personally. Today is Remembrance Sunday. On November the 11th, we pause and we remember the death of so many people in so many wars over the years. And reflecting on that can lead to so many different emotions. So many ways it seems sad, pointless, almost hopeless. There was a report on the news the other night. They went to a village, and there on the memorial stone in the village was the name of a very young man from that village who had died in the First World War. And in that same village, a young man had recently died in Afghanistan, a relative of the soldier who died 100 years ago. And as I watched that, I just thought how desperately sad. That was the war to end all wars. That's what the soldiers said when they came back. It had been so horrible, so horrific. They said, surely nobody will ever want to go to war again. 100 years later, relatives of some of those soldiers are still dying. We can choose to dwell on that. We can choose to dwell on the sadness, the ultimate futility of war. Or we could remember that the freedoms that we have today were won at an enormous cost for us. That there was a generation of people 100 years ago, and again 70 years or so ago, who said, we are willing to make amazing sacrifices so that those who come after us can have peace and freedom. We have absolutely no idea what the world would look like today, what our lives here would look like today, had those people not made that sacrifice all those years ago. One thing we can say, I think things would be very, very, very different from what they are now. And I genuinely don't believe that we would have the freedoms that we have now. We can choose to remember with sadness, or we can choose to remember with thankfulness and gratitude to that generation. That we have a better life today because of the sacrifice that they made. Sometimes remembering the past can actually help us to look to the future with a greater confidence. And so it is with God. Remembering what He did for us in the past fills us with that sense that He is not going to leave us in the future. The psalmist here recalls how God appeared on earth in the storm clouds, with lightning all around him, the sound of thunder preceding him. How he parted the sea and allowed his people to pass through in safety. He remembers the God who led his people like they were a flock, a much loved, protected, defended flock of people who he cared for deeply, who he led to a new land to be his people. And that reassures the psalmist of God's ability to deal with any situation. It reminds him that God is willing to step down and help him with his problems today. It reminds him that God loves his people and will never, ever leave his people. Whatever things might look like in that moment, however black they may look, however much it might look as though God has abandoned him, everything he knows about God from the past tells him God will not abandon me today or any day in the future. And so it fills him with a renewed confidence. The situation, whatever it was still there, but he has a renewed confidence to face it with God at his side. When we feel so low that we can't sleep at night, when we feel too depressed to even talk about our problems, it is okay to tell God how we feel. It's okay to talk to others in the church. We don't have to hide how we feel because we feel it's wrong in some way. When we feel like that, and we all do at times, let's be willing to look again to the God who we know will be the source of our rehabilitation. Let's remind ourselves that we have a God who created all things by his powerful hand. A God who made everything in the universe for us. A God who in the form of Jesus Christ stepped down into humanity to make God known and to show the true nature of his love for us. We have a God who died a horrible death on a cross so that we could be children of God and know him for eternity. Let's remember that a God who did that for us is not going to let us go now. A God who did all that for us is not going to turn away in the moment that we need him most. He will not abandon you. He will always love you. And he wants you to know him more and to love him more. He wants to build a deeper and stronger relationship with you. It won't make the problems go away. I can't promise that, just be thankful to God and everything will be rosy and all the problems will disappear. Life is not that simple. But you will face those problems knowing that you have an all-powerful, all-loving God at your side who will not let you go. And that is a better place to be than facing those problems thinking that God has rejected you. He knows you. He loves you. He wants to build that relationship with you. He will not let you go.